Hi, I want to talk about the show called RWBY. Recently, a few months ago, it finished its second season, and it's worth a rumination, I would say. RWBY is a animated, 3D animated cartoon, essentially, made by Rooster Teeth Productions, who are the same people that made Red vs. Blue and Achievement Hunter and all that great internet stuff. RWBY is like that as well, only it's anime style. It's essentially, it's 3D animation and motion capture, only with an anime sort of edge to it, is the best way to describe it. And I thought I would analyze the thing in three parts, three videos. One for Season 1, one for Season 2, and one video just talking about the trailers, because it had 4 trailers before it came out, and that's what this video would be about, right? So there's 4 trailers for RWBY, right? Each trailer is for each letter in the name, RWBY, and the reason there's 4 trailers and the reason there's 4 letters is because there's 4 characters. There's 4 girls that are each main characters, and each one is styled after a... Okay, well, there's 4 letters that stand for red, white, black, and yellow, right? There's 4 colors, and each of the girls are themed with each of the colors. And they're also named in a way that sort of references the color. Actually, the main character's name is literally RWBY, R-U-B-Y. You know, and I like the show RWBY. I don't actually know why RWBY is pronounced RWBY, but it is. So, right, so the second trailer, the first trailer would be the red trailer, the second is the white trailer, third is the black, and last we have the yellow trailer. The red trailer, you first see the red trailer at the end of... They first aired it at the end of Red vs. Blue Season 10, where it's like a clip for this new show that Monty is making, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, okay, well, after seeing the other ones, it's pretty obvious that this trailer is the most... sort of had the least production value out of all 4. It looked a little cheap in places, like some of some of those like black wolf things. They don't even have sort of dimension. Like the body of the wolf is just completely sort of black. There's not much sense of depth. You know, you don't really see their arms or their, you know, or where there's bends and their muscles or anything. You just see like a black canvas where their body is, and just like red dots where their eyes are. And I mean, it makes sense. They were making Red vs. Blue at the time. I don't expect it to be that good. Another thing to say about this red trailer is that the red trailer is the most anime out of all 4 trailers, and it sort of gave off the wrong impression in that sense, because it sort of suggested that this would be like an anime. Now, when I talk about Season 1, I'm probably going to go on a bit of a... I'm probably going to go to decent length to explain why RWBY is not an anime like most Japanese anime are, and there's obvious superficial reasons why it's not, but there's also like really subtle stylistic reasons why it's not like an anime. But this trailer was in fact a lot like an anime in its sort of in the way the art style, the camera angles. The art style was actually really cool. It had this whole like white mystical thing going on, and the mist and all the trees were really sort of dark. And the only color, the only real like non black white color was RWBY herself, and that, you know, that accentuated her and made her way more interesting, given the background. Now, one thing to note, I'm just going to point out like weird, interesting things as I go along here. One interesting thing in this trailer was the... So pretty much what happens is RWBY walks through a forest and she fights all of these werewolf things, these black werewolf things, while the song playing that talks about, you know, red, white, black, yellow, sort of introduces the notion of the story to you. I mean, it doesn't actually get the story across in any real way, but what's interesting is when she's fighting these werewolf things, she's cutting them apart, like she's completely slicing them apart. And instead of there being blood, there's rose petals. Now that's interesting. On the one hand, you'd say, of course, you know, it's probably easier to animate rose petals than it is to animate, you know, blood itself. You know, blood is like a liquid. I wouldn't know. I don't know anything about animation, but at the same time, rose petals, you know, they're sort of they're small and there's a lot of them. So I don't know how that would be easier to animate, or maybe there's some sort of censorship issue. But I mean, it's obvious that the rose petals are supposed to represent blood. In fact, when she cuts the wolves apart, there's like the entire, like when the arm is missing, that entire area is red. So it's implying that that part is bleeding. So, you know, why they're using rose petals? My guess for the rose petals would be the rose petals sort of appeal to the fairy tale-esque theme of the show, of the trailer, and of RWBY herself, the character, because the character, and this doesn't really, I mean, the trailer sort of gets this across, but the entire point of RWBY's character in general is innocence. You know, her entire character is shrouded with innocence. That's the entire, like, the way she approaches things, the decisions she makes, as we'll see later on. You know, it sort of reeks of innocence. And I mean, I don't know why the rose petals remind me of that, but I think it's sort of in that. It touches on the same area, I think. Or there's also the whole fairy tale-esque theme of this. You could I mean, it's pretty obvious from watching this trailer that RWBY is very similar to Red Riding Hood, right? She's very, very similar to Red Riding Hood. She is designed after Red Riding Hood, and in fact, all 4 girls, I'm pretty sure, are designed after Disney princesses of some sort, or fairy tale characters. Weiss, the white, she's designed after Snow White, and Yellow, I'm pretty sure she's based off of Cinderella. I don't know who Blake is based off of, but Red is definitely Red Riding Hood, and I don't know, roses, princesses, you know, rose petals, it all sort of falls in the same category for some reason. So, you know, I like the fact that they did that. Another thing to note is, right at the start of this trailer, you have RWBY standing on a cliff, and she's looking at a grave. Now, if you pay attention closely, the grave actually says Summer Rose, and her name is Ruby Rose. Oh, wait, that's another whole thing I just realized. Rose is in her actual name, and you have rose petals everywhere. I mean, it's just another whole layer to the whole. It's another thematic layer. The rose petals are. The reason the rose petals are there is because this show is supposed to be innocent, just like Ruby Rose herself is innocent, and blood isn't an innocent thing. It's sort of a dark, gritty thing. That's why they're using rose petals. There you go. No, but Summer Rose, that's her grave, right? That's RWBY's mother. And we find out later in the show that RWBY's mother died. Why she's buried at the side of the cliff, I don't know, but it's interesting that they started our entire introduction to RWBY as a character is having her stand on the edge of the grave with her mother there. So what this implies is hard to tell. I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, we pretty much know now at this point that the events of these trailers all happened before the events of the show itself. So RWBY found the grave of her mother at some point, and that's weird because, you know, why would she, how did she find it, why would she go there, and because it hasn't really been that relevant to her. Although, wait, it's possible that RWBY's mother is actually still alive, so, yeah, it is possible that RWBY's mother is still alive based on what we find out in Volume 2, so, you know what, I'm actually not even going to get into that. But, the point of that, the reason why they have her mother's grave there is to sort of, it's to make the character seem more tragic in her eyes, which is sort of how you build up a protagonist. You make them seem tragic. You know, her mother's gone, she's either dead or disappeared, whatever. So that's interesting. And the last thing, there's not much else to this trailer, really. It's just sort of, you know, you're introduced to RWBY, you're introduced to the art style, and then you have this epic fight sequence where RWBY, this tiny little anime chick, kills a bunch of angry wolf things. It's epic. It's epic, and it's also weird. The weapon RWBY uses is a scythe. It is a massive, massive scythe that is way bigger than her body. It's like 3 times the size of her body. And it comes in like it's like a machine. It comes in a very small, compact form, and then it folds out into this massive scythe thing that's also a gun that she can use. And I like the way that they like display her fighting style and how they make her fighting style different than the other characters' fighting styles. But something RWBY does a lot is she's obviously short and small, and she doesn't have very big, like, you know, powerful features, but she's very fast. And so what she does is she actually uses the scythe to and the gun on the scythe to propel herself through the air using the recoil momentum when she shoots the gun. And she does this throughout the entire show, and that's actually pretty cool. Whether that would have enough momentum to actually propel her through the air that much is sort of hard to tell, but it's worth noting. Secondly, I can't imagine that gun to have a large enough clip size for her to be able to shoot it as often as she does, but, you know, whatever. And the last thing to say is that, well, I mean, fighting with a scythe is probably not very easy, so the fact that RWBY knows how to do this is impressive, to say the least. Impressive, maybe a little unrealistic, but, you know, that's that. There's not much more to say about that. You know, her fighting style is definitely the most unique out of every single character in the show, because she's using a scythe, which has its own name, Crescent Rose, also with the rose thing in there. There's not much to say about RWBY, at least not now. I'm going to move on to White, or Weiss. Now, White, whose name we find out later is Weiss Schnee. Weiss Schnee is actually German for white snow. So, the amount of creativity they did to that. Now, Weiss is styled after Snow White, and in character, what she is she's incredibly rich. She's incredibly, you know, famous. She's royalty. She's aristocracy. She comes from a famous family. You know, she's very rich. She's famous. And you get the sense that, I mean, the story hammers in the idea that this isn't her only feature, and even this trailer, I would say, does that to an extent as well. I actually really, really liked the White trailer. Probably the most before the show actually started coming out. White trailer was my favorite trailer because I thought that it gave us a good idea of White as a character. I was a little surprised in Volume 1 when it turned out that White was a bit more bitchy and annoying and... how do you say? She was just awful. More than I expected. But that's sort of a facade, as you find out later in the show as well, that's not actually all that's there. And I like that. You sort of get the idea that the Weiss you see in this trailer is the actual Weiss that is the real Weiss, so to speak. In the trailer, what she does is, you know, they emphasize her fame and fortune and status, because at the start she shows up on stage and she's singing to, you know, a massive stadium full of people. So she's clearly famous. And while she's singing, and I didn't actually understand this at first, but what's happening is there's a flashback of her fighting this giant metal suit of armor in a church or a castle, or we don't actually know where, but she's fighting this giant suit of armor. Why she's fighting the suit of armor, it's hard to tell. It's possible that the place she's fighting the suit of armor is her home, the Weiss castle or whatever, because she's from, like, aristocracy, a famous family, and the suit of armor is some sort of machine or whatever that was you know, built and programmed so that she could train how to use, you know, her so she could train combat with it. And this is basically her you know, training combat, which is interesting in and of itself, because, you know, she can sing, she could have this great career, she already has this status. Why is she training combat? Why is she trying to be this warrior type individual? And that's interesting, because it suggests that there's more of an ethic to Weiss than just the, you know, bitchy, annoying rich girl, right? There's more of an ethic to her. There's a pride. There's a sense of honor there, which is pretty interesting. You know, she actually wants to prove herself in a sense and not just be the rich girl. And that's pretty cool. It's actually, there's this little subtle touch, but she actually gets injured by the suit of armor. You know, there's a whole, like, it starts bleeding on the side of her head, and that blood eventually goes away, and it becomes a scar. And if you actually watch the show later on in seasons 1 and 2, and you look at Weiss really carefully, you can still see the scar show up a little bit, and they actually highlight it a little bit in particular scenes to emphasize the fact that she has actually done this battle, and that this fight with the suit of armor was a real thing that happened. And I think what they're trying to emphasize is the fact that, you know, Weiss spent a long time training and trying to be really, you know, becoming smart, training her mind, her you know, sparring capabilities, so that she could become this epic great warrior, because she did not just want to be the rich girl and have things handed to her. You know, there's a sense, you get a very strong sense of how much work she puts into this. And the last thing you could say about Weiss is probably my favorite part, is her actual fighting style. Weiss's fighting style, I'd say, is the most interesting, it's the most realistic fighting style out of all the 4 girls, right? Because you have RWBY, who just uses her scythe and flies around like crazy, and it's, sure, I mean, maybe realism isn't really the question. The question is, you know, how did she even know how to learn how to do all this? It seems amazing that anyone could do this. It's like RWBY is basically like Yoda in this setting. You know, she's the Yoda of the RWBY setting. And the other characters, I mean, we'll talk about them, you know, later in the video, but what they do is, it's not, they don't have as much technique as RWBY does, but they do things that are equally as extraordinary, whereas Weiss, you know, she's essentially a spellcaster. She just has, like, the little rapier called the Murtnaster, or whatever it's called, and she uses dust, which is this sort of form of magic within the setting, to cast what are essentially spells. You know, the Murtnaster can create certain effects. It can generate ice, it can create, I think it can create fire, it can create these, like, these weird circular rune things that can accelerate you through space, or make you fly, or lock an enemy down, or so propel somebody through the air, and all sorts of different effects. And she's basically, she knows how to use all these things to great effect. And it's interesting because it seems to me like that's the only real fighting style that one of these girls could actually learn were this a real situation, right? Because, you know, you can learn, it's not like learning how to use a sword or learning how to use a gun like the others do and get right up close into the action, like Yellow does or like Yang does, because that is way more difficult, and that is the type of combat that favors men a lot more than women, who are, you know, lanky, short, and, you know, not very strong like Weiss is. You know, she's incredibly thin. She has none of the she doesn't have the physique for just raw brawling, as well as. And even though, like, Yang is pretty much a brawler, you know, Weiss can't do that. Instead, she takes the, if this were a game of Dota, for instance, Weiss would be a support class. That's the sense that I get. You know, she knows how to use her abilities to great effect, but that's really all it is. It's about knowing how to use your abilities at what time. It's not really about karate or kung fu or using a certain weapon up close. You know, it's, you know, that stuff takes more finesse, that stuff takes more strength. That stuff is honestly harder to learn, probably, in order to do it well. That's why, you know, people who actually know real martial arts, you know, they've trained for years, whereas Weiss, you know, she doesn't have to know all that. All she has to know is how to use her Murtnaster, how to use her runes, and when to use them. You know, she doesn't have to engage the cerebellum at all. She just has to stay far away at a safe distance and, you know when to dodge, know how to get out of the way, know how to be safe, know how to, you know, how to parry and stuff, but as well as know how to use her abilities, her magical abilities, to great effect. And it's just, it feels like a lot of theory. which is something that Weiss, who has read a lot of books and studied a lot, is the type of thing that she would know and she would learn how to do. So I like the fact that her fighting style is the most believable out of all of them, because it's very, very believable that someone like Weiss could learn how to use the Merknaster and know how to use it very well, because, you know, it takes more book smarts than street smarts, so to speak. By contrast, you know, you have Yang's fighting style, which is so ridiculous and unbelievable, but we'll get to that later. So that's pretty much... I was honestly think that Weiss is probably my favorite character out of the four, and even now at this point, I think she's the most developed. I think she's probably the most interesting. The least well, no, yeah, she's not. She's the least cliched, maybe. And she has the most believable fighting style out of all. And this show, above all else, emphasizes fighting styles. Okay. Now, Black trailer. Now, it's pretty clear at this point that the art style and the animation has greatly improved. You get to see a lot more dimension. There's a lot more color variance than in the red trailer, which is all black, white, and red. Those are the only three, like, you know, the only three colors were used in that trailer completely, which is weird, right? Because in animation you have all sorts of colors show up on the screen. Black trailer also had, but Black trailer had a lot more color in it, but it also, it's interesting because it also had a lot of contrast. I really like the art style right at the beginning of the trailer, where you have Blake sitting on a rock and you have that sort of pink mist on the ground and these sort of you know, red Japanese maple trees with the leaves falling down all over the place. It was, I mean, I don't know, it was intriguing, it was engaging, it was fascinating. I wanted to know what happened. This forest sort of exuded this very very powerful sense of mystery and might, and I wanted to learn more about what was in the forest, really. It set the tone almost immediately, a very sort of, you know, almost a dark tone in a sense, but dark and mysterious. That was the tone that it set, which is sort of Blake in a nutshell. At least that's what they go with, I mean, at the start. Then the tone sort of shifted almost immediately, and I was quite disappointed. It went from dark, mysterious, and soft to, you know, loud, cacophonous, angry, and emo. Honestly, I don't even like to use that word, but it was like it was like My Chemical Romance on drugs or something. It was a complete tonal shift. For one, they introduced a new character who had, you know, a whole bunch of lines of dialogue named Adam, and they did a whole bunch of things with him, and honestly, I think he has more screen time in this trailer than Black does Blake herself, which is weird, or at least he has, like, as much as she does, which is very weird because the trailer is supposed to be about her, but in a sense, it's also about him. And I mean, knowing the story after seeing Volume 2, I understand what they were going for, I understand what they were trying to do, but this trailer, this was the weakest trailer out of the four because of this. Even the voice acting wasn't so good. The voice acting was actually garbage at some points, I'm sorry to say. Like, right at the start, you know, Adam, the name of the character, I don't know. His voice actor, I don't know what was going on. Maybe he didn't feel like didn't connect with the lines or whatever, but it just all felt cheesy and off and bad and just pointless and out of place. And they tried to, like, have actual complexity and subtlety in the voice acting as well, but it just all felt wrong. Like, there's a scene within the trailer where Blake and Adam are discussing setting the charges, and Blake's like, set the charges, and Blake is like, well, what about the crew members? And he's like, well, what about them? And it's just like, okay, I know what you're trying to say. You know, he's ruthless and a little cruel, and she's not. That's what you're trying to tell us. But I mean, come on, you're supposed to just introduce the bare notion of what Blake's character was about, not have, like, you weren't supposed to go into her backstory, is what I feel like. They tried to give us so much backstory within this trailer that it just felt off. It was too much. They were trying to do too much. That would be my biggest. That would be my main central criticism of this. They tried to do too much. They tried to go into all this backstory about like, oh well, where did Blake come from and why is she doing this? We know all of this later. We find out, you know, based on what Blake says in season 1. But it's like, it was just too complicated. It was just too complicated for a very short, like 5-minute, 3-minute trailer that was supposed to mainly just be an action scene and show us how Blake actually fights and just give us some sense that she's sort of dark and mysterious and has, you know, a bit of an edge to her, but don't actually go into like, oh, the specifics of what was said and what happened and why she turned against the White Fang or whatever. And show all this time trying to emphasize Adam, we don't even know him at all or why he matters or anything. He's just a question mark right now. It was so out of place. There's a scene where they're fighting the spider bot where the dialogue was so ridiculous. The spider bot basically knocks them out of the train cart room, and they're like flying across. They're flying across the cart, and it's about to start attacking them. And Blake looks to, not Blake. Adam looks to Blake, and he's like, "Buy me some time." And Blake is like, "Are you sure? Do it." And it's just so cheesy and bad and terribly voice acted. Like, first of all, they're in the middle of a fight. You understand that they're in the middle of a fight, and you have this like 5 seconds of dialogue happen right in the middle of a fight. First of all, that's very anime. That shit happens in anime all the time. There's a fight happening, and then a character has like an internal monologue in the middle of the fight, and it's ridiculous. But the reason it doesn't work here is because this seems like, this feels a lot more like live action because it's happening in 3D, and based on like how the animation is done, this feels like it's happening live. And for them to stop the fight to exchange these pointless lines of dialogue is just like, okay. I mean, they're trying to say that like, oh, okay, this is Adam, he's trying to do something. He's gonna, use his power or whatever to kill the spider bot, and he does. But I mean, it was just so out of place. I don't actually know how they could have made this better, but I think it should have been about something else. Having Adam having him play this huge role in the trailer made it seem very, very out of place, is what I would say. There's a few things to note. Okay, one thing you could point out here is the weird moon. In the background of this trailer, you have the moon of the world of Remnant, and the moon isn't like a sphere. It's like a sphere that's shattered on one side, and all these bits are floating off. Now, I don't actually know if this moon is like out in space or something, because if it is, that doesn't make any sense. Why these like little asteroid bits would be like out here. It's just interesting. It's also interesting because in the Red trailer, the moon was just a whole perfect spherical moon. There was no bits. It wasn't like completely, shattered in bits. And maybe they didn't know how to design the moon when they made the Red trailer. But I mean, that just emphasized the point that the Red trailer was made very early in the stage of production. What else to say? You have Blake and Adam's fighting styles. Adam's fighting style makes no sense. I mean, they were trying to go for a very badass type thing. He has this sword in a sheath, and he can use the sheath can pretty much shoot the sword out of it very, very quickly. And the sheath is also a gun somehow, because that's actually how this works in RWBY. Every single character has both a sword and a gun, or a sword that somehow folds into a gun. Whatever. That's not even the point. Assuming I could accept the fact that there's somehow a gun in the sheath, what doesn't make any sense is that he constantly resheaths his sword after taking it out and killing a robot. Like, he will take out his sword, kill one of the robot guards, and then immediately put the sword back into the sheath, while there's still like 20 other, robots around him. Like, why would you put the sword back into the sheath? You're still in the middle of the fight, man. Like, presumably he wants to use the sheath again to shoot the sword out of it and kill a robot that way, but it's just so stupid. Like, I imagine that would take, more time. Sheathing a sword isn't something you could do that quickly. Swords are long. You have to, like, extend your arms. Whatever. It just didn't seem out of place. It seemed so out of place, I'm in the middle of a fight. I'm going to unsheath my sword just to kill one guy, just to resheath it. Blake's fighting style is Pretty cool. It's kind of like Ruby's in that she's very lightweight, and you sort of get that sense. She's very good at jumping. She jumps around a lot. She would be like the DPS on the team, kind of like Ruby, mixed with support. She's like a semi-carry, you know, in Dota 2 terms. What she does is she uses both. She also has a sword that comes out of a massive sheath, and she also uses the sheath in fights. So it's like the sheath is also kind of a sword. Don't get any questions about that. But the actual sword that she has is like, it's a sword that can also disconnect, and she could twirl it around on like a rope or a chain or something, like a chain blade, kind of like Kratos from God of War. Yeah, and the sword can also fold into a gun. There's also like a gun attached to the hilt or something. So it's like it's like three weapons in one. It's a sword, it's a chain sword, and a gun. So yeah, complicated. But her fighting style is... I don't know why, but her fighting style is the least interesting out of the four of them. You know, even though it should be the most interesting. I guess it's sort of in theme with how the trailer went. Did they just try to give her too much? She doesn't just use a sword, she doesn't just use a gun, she uses a sword that's also a chain blade, that's also a gun. It's just... relax there. I mean, at least with Ruby, I mean, she has a scythe, but she uses the gun mostly to propel herself than to shoot enemies. Whereas, you know, Blake is like a bit of everything. That's kind of what they went with her. Anyway, moving... Oh, well, one thing I forgot to mention, the music. The music, again, like everything else, the music here was really pretentious. Except for, like, I love the first, like, few seconds of the trailer where you had the Blake sitting in the glade, and the music there was fine. It was, like, classical, and then it shifted into this emo, you know, From Shadows theme. You could look it up on YouTube, and it was just really... it was just out of place. I mean, I didn't like the emo style of it. They didn't have to go into that direction. It's pretty obvious that Blake has an edge to her without having to hammer it in with emo music. The trailer, though, sorry, the song, though, if you pay attention to the lyrics, has a lot to do with Blake's character and her actual backstory and the story of the Faunus and all that stuff. So you could see where they were going, even from this. One thing you can tell, like, despite everything, is you get a decent sense of Blake's character. Unlike Ruby, you get no sense of Ruby's character, minus, you know, a little subtle, small subtle cues about innocence. You basically have Blake's character completely mapped out in this trailer. You find out that she has an edge, you find out that she sort of has a dark past, you find out that she's kind of criminal. That's that. You also find out that she's different somehow, based on the From Shadows lyrics. Oh, the last thing I want to point out about the Black trailer is that, you know, Adam and Blake are raiding, they're raiding a train with a bunch of robots on it, right? And as we find out in Season 2, these robots are probably the robots that are, you know, made by that guy, General Ironwood, in the military. So that's, you know, that's who they're going after. That's this is obviously a train that's carrying some sort of military equipment, and they hijack it and decide to destroy the military equipment on it. So this is an example of the White Fang acting as a sort of a rebellious rogue, yeah, sort of insurgent group, and it's interesting. Because, I mean, it's interesting to just draw that connection. They were almost definitely going against the forces of General Ironwood from Season 2. So, and this is actually the point that Blake decides to leave the White Fang. So, Adam, this individual, you know, who was with her, was against Ironwood and what they were doing from the very start. And based on what I think about Ironwood, I mean, I just think it's kind of telling, but we'll get to that in, we'll get to that when we do Season 2. And lastly, we have, well, lastly, let's end this video off with a Yang. Yang, yellow. Also known as Yang Xiaolong. I love Yang. I honestly love Yang. Yang is voiced by Barbara Dunkelman, who, if you're familiar with Rooster Teeth Productions and what they do, Barbara Dunkelman is the incredibly attractive blonde, whatever, community representative person, and well, she's hilarious. She does these puns all the time, and so what they do is they have Yang also do puns. I love Barbara. I really do. So, I mean, this character honestly reminded me of her a little bit, or kind of a lot. I feel like they didn't really try to make him any that different. They're just like, oh guys, here's Barbara in animated form, and she's even like designed on her, based on her or something. That's kind of the that's the implication that I was getting. Honestly, Yang's character for season 1 at least was basically just like an inside joke with the audience, is what it was. It was incredibly hot Barbara and making puns and doing badass things is what it was. That's what it was. A few things to note. There is a memento at the start of the video that talks about beauty, and in the lyrics to the Red trailer, you know, each of the 4 girls has their own theme, and Yellow's theme is Yellow's beauty burns gold. Now, the memento at the start of the trailer talks about how, you know, society wants us to be symmetrical and whatnot, but every misshapen curve or whatever has its own inner beauty. And I find that a little bit contradictory, given that Yang herself is just this gorgeous blonde goddess that has no misshapen anything, completely perfectly symmetrical, beautiful in every way. Her hair is enormous. It goes down to her ass from her head. It's like Latina hair. I don't even know. They tried really hard to make her as pretty as they possibly could, even compared to the other 3 girls. Now, what do we say? Okay. There's a few weird things in this trailer. I mean, for one, there's a whole bunch of questions. Like, there's even questions, even now, we still don't actually know why this trailer had what it had. Like, at least Blake's trailer makes sense now. If you've watched season 1 and 2, Blake's trailer makes perfect sense. Yang's trailer still doesn't make total sense. Why is she in this club? Like, we find out she's looking, she has like a picture of a girl on her phone, and she asks Junior, the bar owner, have you seen this girl? Where is she? Who is that girl, and why is Yang looking for her? I mean, presumably she's looking for her mother, right? That was the idea. We get it. We learn in season 2 that Yang is looking for her mother, so maybe this is her mother she's looking for. But I don't know. Why would she go to this bar? Why would her mother be at the bar? We don't know anything about that investigation at all. Maybe we'll find out. I don't know. It also could be Cinder Fall at some point. I mean, the woman in the picture had black, dark hair, so, I mean, I don't know. I'm not, maybe I'm presuming too much. What can we say about Yang, though? Yang. Yang likes to have fun. She's incredibly confident. She's incredibly sure of herself, and you really get the sense that she's doing it, like, completely for the lulz. Pretty much from the start, she just struts into this club. You know, she's on this badass motorcycle. She struts into this club without a care in the world, just like, I'm Yang, I do whatever the fuck I want, because if you don't, I'll beat your ass. You know, it's interesting because Monty loves his badass fighting chicks. So even in Red vs. Blue, there's a ton of badass fighting chicks, but Yang is like the quintessential perfect example of one. You know, all she does is do things for fun. She's essentially a hedonist. You know, in all honesty. I mean, I'll talk more about that in season 1, but yeah, she's essentially a hedonist. There's a few weird things in this trailer. When she talks to Junior, she grabs his balls, which is, whoa, aggressive, but, you know, it's Yang. She can do whatever she wants, right? And afterwards, she's like, oh, I'm sorry, Junior, let's kiss and make up. And, you know, she closes her eyes and, like, you know, pretends to kiss him. And for whatever reason, he leans in just to get punched in the face and thrown across the room. Why would he do that? Like, is he retarded? I mean, she just aggressively grabbed your balls, dude. You are not... I mean, she's obviously crazy right from the get-go. Why would you... Why would you get anywhere near her again? Anyway. Yeah, that was just stupid. The music. Oh god, the music. So the music in the in Yang's trailer was actually... So there's her own theme, which is called I Burn, but the I Burn song isn't actually played in this trailer. This trailer is a medley of the I Burn and the other 3 trailer songs you had in the first 3 trailers in RWBY, White, and in Black trailer. And they sort of mix them all together in this nice medley that sort of is synced up well with the music in the club becoming sort of screwed up when Yang starts fighting all the people in the club, and she fucks up the DJ so that the music gets all different, and that's kind of cool. But then her own theme starts playing. Later in her own theme starts playing, and I just want to say her own theme is the most badass theme out of all 4. I love her theme. Her theme, I Burn, that song, it's the one that goes like it's like I burn, can't hold me down. Whatever, I can't sing, but that's the theme, and it's a really good theme. I could listen to that theme like forever. You should go look it up. The last thing to note is Yang's actual fighting style. Yang's fighting style. Yang, if this were a game of Dota, again, or if this were, I don't know, anything, Yang would be the tank of the group. Her fighting style is very, very aggressive. Basically what she does, her weapon is this sort of armlet that shoots bullets out of the armlet, and that's pretty much it. So basically what she does is she punches people whilst triggering a bullet being shot from the armlet, so it's like she punches the guy plus the impact of the bullet. And pretty much what that involves is she has to get up close and personal, and her fighting style is very sort of boxing. She doesn't really do much martial arts or anything. She just sort of gets up and starts punching people. It's kind of like Main in Red vs. Blue, only Main in Red vs. Blue was way more just straight up grunt, like I'm gonna come in here and like slowly tear you apart and or whatever. Yang is more sort of fluid and agile than that, but for the most part it's very basic. She just runs right at you and starts punching you. It's interesting because when we get to season 1 and 2, you actually see how she fights other people who know how to counter that type of fighting style. Granted, her fighting style is only possible because of her semblance, and as we find out, characters in this setting sort of have a innate magical essence to them, and Yang's essence, semblance, whatever, allows her to absorb kinetic energy and become more stronger as she takes more damage, so to speak. She's kind of like the Hulk, in a sense, then. She's an incredibly hot version of the Hulk. And yeah, that's cool, interesting, very, very unbelievable. I mentioned that Weiss's fighting style was the most believable because RWBY, she's wielding a weapon that's like 3 times her size and using it to propel herself through the air. That's crazy. And then you have Blake, who has a weapon that can do everything. And then you have Yang, who, straight up gives no shits and just runs straight at the bad guy and just starts punching them. That's what she does. And it's ridiculous, but it makes perfect sense with Yang as a character, the carefree, thrill-seeking hedonist that she is, and it makes sense with Barbara Dunkelman. So, I mean, it makes sense. It's not believable, if this were realistic, but it kind of makes sense. Yeah, honestly, Yang becomes way more interesting in Season 2 than she is in Season 1, and in Season 1, she's pretty much just the thrill-seeking, carefree, hedonistic comic relief, honestly, is all she is. And that's basically all that this trailer tells us about her. It gives us that impression. She owns the room. She walks in and she does whatever she wants. That's the sense that we're given, and that's pretty accurate to what she's like, at least until later on. We also find out that Yang and RWBY are sisters, except, as we know later on, Yang and RWBY have different mothers, so Summer Rose, RWBY's dead mother, or missing mother, is not Yang's actual mother. Yang's mother is someone else. Anyway, that's pretty much all there is to be said about these trailers. The story becomes much, much more interesting once we get into Season 1, and even more especially once we get into Season 2, but you'll have to wait a week for that. Anyway, that's all for now, boys. Cheers!